You notice it broke a string? Anybody see that?
I know you have been missing good old Ezra, so here we're back. Last couple of weeks we have taken a break of sorts, but now we will continue to discuss, cover this book. We will finish off chapter 5, starting from verse 6 all the way till the end of the chapter. So go ahead and situate yourself, and as you are situating and finding your place, let me remind you where we left off last time around, a couple of weeks ago. Basically, the Jews, they took a 15-year hiatus because of opposition, because of exterior forces. They were not allowed to continue the building project. They had already, finished the foundation and some other elements of the temple, but then they had to stop because of these enemies around that area. During that time also, kings fell and kings rose, so time is just ongoing and circumstances change. From the beginning of this process, they had a very friendly king, if you recall, Cyrus, that allowed them to go back to their homeland. But again, this king did not remain in this position throughout, and now we have other people in charge, which is why they're going back and forth as to continuing this building project, and there are questions whether or not it is a legitimate thing that they are doing. So this is where we're at right now. In the beginning of chapter 5, God utilized some prophets to encourage the Jews to go ahead and finish the project, and through their encouragement, through their motivation, now it seems like they're moving forward and doing the things that God expected them to do pertaining to the building or the rebuilding of the temple. So let's go ahead and pick up where we left off. I will read from verse 6 again all the way to verse 17. And it says here, this is a copy of the letter that Tattenai sent, the governor of the region beyond the river, and Shethar-Boznai and his companions, the Persians who were in the region beyond the river, to Darius the king. They sent a letter to him in which was written thus: to Darius the king, all peace. Let it be known to the king that we went into the province of Judea, to the temple of the great God, which is being built with heavy stones, and timber is being laid in the walls. And this work goes on diligently and prospers in their hand. Then we asked those elders and spoke thus to them: who commanded you to build this temple and to finish these walls? We also asked them their names to inform you, that we might write the names of the men who were chief among them. Verse 11, and thus they returned us an answer, saying, we are the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and we are rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago, which a great king of Israel built and completed. But because our fathers provoked the God of heaven to wrath, he gave them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the Chaldean, who destroyed this temple and carried the people away to Babylon. However, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree to build this house of God. Also the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple that was in Jerusalem and carried into the temple of Babylon, those King Cyrus took from the temple of Babylon, and they were given to one named Sheshbazzar, whom he had made governor. And he said to him, take these articles, go carry them to the temple site that is in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be rebuilt on its former site. Then the same Sheshbazzar came and laid the foundation of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. But from that time, even until now, it has been under construction, and it is not finished. Now, therefore, if it seems good to the king, let a search be made in the king's treasure house, which is there in Babylon, whether it is so that a decree was issued by King Cyrus to build this house of God at Jerusalem, and let the king send us his pleasure concerning this matter. So on verse 6, we are reintroduced to a couple of characters. These were Persian officials, governors, authorities, regional authorities, if you will. They were below the king, but they were in charge of maintaining the peace and figuring out if everyone was doing what they were supposed to do. This particular person was in charge of this region, which was a vast region. Basically, it says here beyond the river, that is very likely the river Euphrates. So anything west of that river, which Judea was part of that region, he was somewhat in charge of. He needed to, again, maintain the peace, make sure that everyone was following the rules. So during his investigation, he noticed something. He noticed this building project, right? And it's interesting because, again, in this particular section, it's mentioned here that this was a copy of the letter that Tattenai, which was this official, that he sent to Darius. Now, this was an official letter, an official Persian letter written in their official language that we have here made available to us. Basically, this was just transcribed or copied and pasted into the biblical text to shine light upon this portion of history. It was written in Aramaic. This portion of Ezra is all in Aramaic, which is interesting because, again, God is utilizing this bureaucratic language, these official documents, as part of Scripture. And this alludes to the idea, this reinforces the fact that God is God of all. God is not only the God of Hebrew and a little bit of Greek, but also the God of Aramaic and any other language. God is not only God of the religious elements of the world, but also the official, bureaucratic, governmental, political, and anything in between. God is the God of all, and He uses everything according to His will. And here we have, again, an example of that. This was literally a document that was utilized in this exchange between the king and his subordinate, that God was somehow managing, orchestrating. He was the authority over this exchange to the point where their words were actually His divine revealed words. So this guy sends this letter to this particular king that was in charge. And from verse 8 to verse 10, he basically gives his observations. Again, he was in charge to sort of investigate this region. He was to manage the peoples from this area. And he noticed something that was intriguing, that was happening there. On verse 8, let me read that again. It says, after the brief introduction to the letter, "Let it be known to the king that we went into the province of Judea to the temple of the great God, which is being built with heavy stones." Literally, the term there is, it's rolling stones. He was a fan? No. The reason why in the original it's rolling stones, it's because any stone that was big needed to be rolled. So the reference in the original of a rolling stone just basically meant that these were huge stones that were being utilized for this building project, and timber is being laid in the walls. And this work goes on diligently and prospers in their hands. In other words, he was essentially saying, look, there's something big going on. Here we're not talking about people who are building a hut, a little tent, a little altar to their foreign god, something meaningless, something insignificant. We're talking about a huge building project. We're talking about an endeavor that is noteworthy. And because of that, he took notice. Because of that, it was alarming. I remember when we lived, not in our current house, but in our previous house. As you know, we have 3 kids, so total of 5 people, but it was a 2-bedroom house. But the house was kind of quirky. Essentially, half the house was garage space. It was like a 2.5 whatever car garage. Whoever built it before really liked garage spaces, not necessarily living spaces. So even though the rooms were roomy, there was still more room that we could utilize as a living space. Namely, the idea was to convert a portion of the garage into a 3rd bedroom, Bella's bedroom. So that was the idea, and eventually we went ahead and did that. And this is Ramona, so I didn't get permits. Come on. I try to do it as legitimately as possible, again, for safety, and also, so the house would be increasing value. So it wasn't Mickey Mouse per se. You know the terminology, right? It wasn't just like, pasted in with super glue and gum. Everything was done somewhat legitimately, but I didn't pull permits because, again, I didn't want to spend the extra $20,000 on making that legitimate. And, I utilized different people. I utilized YouTube. I did some of the work myself. I hired out for other portions of the work that were way beyond my capabilities. But one of the people that actually helped me was my neighbor. The neighbor in front of me, kind of diagonal to the left, he was actually building his own house. And I remember a day when the inspector came in just to evaluate the progress of his building project, which was, again, totally legitimate from, dirt all the way up to, the roof, right? And the inspector was inspecting his building project. And then, again, I live across the street from him. This he told me after the fact. And the guy looked over, and he's like, what's going on in there? What's happening? Because there are a bunch of things happening. And then Tom, his name was Tom, he said, don't worry about that. Don't look there, look at here. Do not look there. This is none of your concern. You're here to inspect my project, not whatever is going on there. Point being, sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it's obvious that something is happening, and if the inspector is diligent enough, he's going to want to investigate. Thankfully, that one was not, but this one was very diligent. He was very professional. He was actually just doing his job. Again, it seems odd because they had the right to do it, but now leadership has changed. Years, over a decade has gone by, so this information tends to fall, away from, the people who are in charge, because there are many other more important things that they needed to keep track of. And now all of a sudden we have these groups of people who are building this huge temple, and no one knows the reason why. If it was legitimate, if it was up to code, if it was appropriate. So this person was investigating to see what was happening, to see if the Jews were actually authorized to do the work. So not only was he questioning that, but he wanted to get their names to make it all official, wrote it all down. And then from verse 11 to verse 16, we have the response of the Jews. And it's interesting, it's very thorough, but they start off on verse 11 by saying, and thus they returned us an answer saying, we are the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and we are rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago, which a great king of Israel built and completed. They started out by establishing who they were, essentially their identity. Who were they? They were the servants of this great God, the God of heaven and earth. probably a little poke at Darius indirectly. Essentially, they were saying, look, we know that Darius is in charge. He is the head honcho. He is the authority. But even above him, there is this other dude that we are servants of. Again, the God of heaven and the God of earth, who outranks Darius. So we are here just abiding by. We are here in obedience to. We are here following his choice, following his plan, following his will, that we should rebuild his house. They also mentioned that the original temple, on the following verse, that it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. So all of these things were somewhat recorded. The names were well known. So they were trying to situate themselves in history again, legitimizing what was happening. But the thing that I want to highlight is how they were explaining this. Because it would have been very easy for them to say, look, we are the servants of the living God, the Almighty God, the God of heaven and earth. And we used to live here, and we had a great looking temple. It was marvelous. It was one of the, the greatest building structures in this portion of the world. But unfortunately, out of the blue, these rotten Babylonians came without notice and destroyed it all, took us captive, and again, ruined everything that we had built up to that point. No, that's not what they said. Essentially, they said, look, this happened, but it happened because of us. It happened because we were disobedient. It happened because we, for a period of our history, did not follow the decrees, the will of our God. It happened because we had it coming. It essentially was our fault. We don't want to dwell in it or on it, but we want to acknowledge that what happened because of our wrongdoing. We are the servants of this God, this Almighty God, and what occurred was just discipline, was just punishment. Then they go on to talk about the actual decree from Cyrus. Again, they're establishing these truths so that those could be investigated. So they're mentioning that this great king allowed them to go back, and then, they gave the resources that were taken from the original temple back to the Jews so they can utilize it as they had originally been intended to be utilized for. And also mentioned the leader, the Persian appointed Jewish leader that was someone in charge in the beginning of this process, right? Sheshbazzar, this governor of sorts that was leading the way in this part of their Jewish history, so they could go back to their homeland and start to rebuild. So all of this to legitimize what was occurring, what was happening. But in no way were they justifying, were they minimizing their part in what occurred. The negative things that happened. They said, look, we did it. It was just what occurred to us. But fact of the matter is, God, in His great mercy, now has allowed us to come back to our homeland. And then finally, on verse 17, we have the conclusion, not of this whole story, but of the chapter, and it's concluding with a request. It's a request, again, at the end of this letter, at the end of this official document, it's a request that the king, the current king, would go and research his treasures, the place where all the important documents and all the valuable things were stored, so that he could research if in fact the Jews were telling the truth. And it says here, once again, now therefore, if it is if it seems good to the king, let a search be made in the king's treasure house, which is there in Babylon, whether it is so that a decree was issued by King Cyrus to build this house of God at Jerusalem, and let the king send us his pleasure concerning this matter. Now, I don't want to jump the gun here or ruin the story for you, but on chapter 6, we're going to have a positive response. We're going to have actually a good outcome out of this ordeal, which in the beginning was rather unexpected. Remember, what was going on in this period of time? They had stopped working. The building project was delayed several times because of opposition. We went through a portion of Ezra that was the whole focus. It wasn't really chronological, but the author made sure that he informed the readers that there were many periods of opposition, and because of that opposition, the work stopped for several periods of time, even for, over decades. And now we have this king, this current king, who is going to research and find these documents, and eventually he's going to give a rather positive response. Now, evaluating what was happening here, specifically with this manager, with this inspector of sorts. Originally, or initially, the Jews probably were just thinking, man, here we go again. Another person who is going to make up all of these lies. We had seen this before. Who is going to exaggerate what is happening, who is going to manipulate this story just to impede us from doing the job that God calls us to do. But what we see as the story unfolds, it's anything but. We see this inspector doing his due diligence. Again, it was his job to make sure that everyone was following the rules. And he wasn't necessarily accusing them of wrongdoing. He was asking what was happening, but he was not hostile. Instead of accusations, he just wanted to verify what was happening. And what we see here, evidently everything is utilized for God's purposes and God's plans. But something that initially very likely was perceived as something negative, it was actually something positive. God was using several different people to sort of start the building project once again. He utilized the prophets in the beginning of the chapter. We saw that. But also he was utilizing these foreign bureaucrats to do that as well. Basically, the guy gave them an opportunity to sort of think back as to the legitimacy of the building project, why they were doing what they were doing, and the reason why it had stopped and why they should continue. All of that was pretty profitable, because by now, at least some of them might have thought, well, it's been 15 years. We haven't really progressed in this building project. We are already here. Does God really need a temple? Maybe this is all, water under the bridge. Maybe it was something in our past. We are already back in our homeland, so let's just leave it at that. We, hoped to build a temple, but unfortunately it didn't work out. But let's just kind of do the best that we can with what we have. Let's not move forward with the building project, and let's just, live our lives the best way possible. Maybe some of them were thinking about that. But God was instigating, but God was motivating, but God was making them reflect upon their history and this particular cause and his call to them to continue. another story. This one you're familiar with because I remind you, I inform you of my handiness, my prowess with my handiwork very often. And now current home. Went through a lot of heartache, sweat, blood, and tears. The house was, relatively in good shape, but needed some major updating, and I did it in, different periods of time. Didn't do it all at once. But the last major, building or rebuilding or just updating project was the master bathroom. And out of everything that was done, that was the hardest. It took literally forever. And I finally finished it last year. And when I say I finished it, what I mean is it was 99% done. I did not put the baseboards in. And to me, I don't know the reason why. Part of me was just being petty. Part of me was like, I like it without baseboards. I was just over it, if I'm just being honest. And God utilized my wife to every once in a while give me a nudge. Hey, are you ever going to finish it? It would be lovely to have baseboards. Wouldn't this be great if you actually finished what you started? My point is, if not for her, I would be baseboardless, and I would be totally fine with it. I would not lose sleep over the lack of baseboard. But essentially, it would be incomplete. Did all that work just to stop at 99.9% finished? Silly, right? So sometimes we need that nudge. Sometimes we need those reminders. Sometimes we need, some people to just look around and say, hey, when are you going to finish that? Didn't you start that? Didn't you say you're going to finish that? This decade, this millennia, are you actually going to follow through with your promise, with your goal, with the expectations? So something that potentially was thought of as negative was actually very much positive. They needed the scrutiny. They needed the bureaucracy. They needed the reminders, or else they very likely would not have continued. Another thing that we see here, and now just looking at it holistically overall, is their response, and I want to spend a few minutes on this because it is rather interesting. They had an opportunity to depict what occurred in their history in multiple ways. And human nature dictates that usually we fall into one of two extremes. The one extreme of trying to digest, of evaluating, and of communicating history, our own personal history, is that of a victim. Oh, poor me. Look at all the stuff that happened to me. Didn't do anything to deserve it. Was totally out of my control. I wish things worked out better. But unfortunately, me being the victim that I am, didn't have control over anything. All of these things happened, and here I am. Poor me. How horrible my life is. Not because of what I have done or what I have not done. Not because any of that was my responsibility, because again, my perspective on my personal history is that of a victim. That's one extreme. Another extreme would be the perspective of personal, or essentially just, any type of history, as someone being the masters of their destiny. Oh, this happened? Oh, I achieved that? Oh, look at what occurred. Kudos to me. All of this happened because of my hard work, my diligent effort, my natural prowess, my stick-to-itiveness. Ah, fancy, huh? Sometimes I think of a word and I say, man, that's a really good word for me to use. And then when it comes out, I wish I hadn't tried. But that one worked. Stick-to-itiveness. Master of my own destiny. Look at everything that I was able to conquer, to achieve. That was all because of me and only me. That's another extreme. And unfortunately, neither one or the other is a correct way to interpret personal history. The way that they did it was, there was an exile, but it was an appropriate divine judgment. We had part of that. It was appropriate, but it was divine. Now we are being restored. But this is because of divine mercy. Again, we are servants of the God of heaven and earth, and He essentially is the one that is orchestrating all of this. This is not our doing. This is not our idea. It is not being done based on our might and our power. It's purely mercy, grace. And even when we consider all of the other variables in this story, in this history, whether we're talking about Persian officials or even kings, ultimately they all serve God's divine purposes. That's the perspective. We're not victims. We're not masters of our universe. You're not He-Man. God is the one in charge. And whatever is happening according to His will. And He maintains that. He remains in that position, regardless if we like it or understand it fully. God, in His sovereignty, what He does is, to borrow from Amy, do you crochet or do you knit? God crochets. God crochets through human action and activity. These strings, the twine or the yarn appropriate, right? God is crocheting according to His will. Weaving together what we do, how we do what we do, for His good and ultimate purposes. This story is a testament to that, and many other stories. Probably the most obvious one is the story of Joseph of Egypt. Remember that story? You know the story. Because of jealousy, they sold the favorite brother to slavery. And then you fast forward to the end. When Joseph is interacting with his brothers, what does he say? What you did, you intended to harm me. But God intended it for the good that He was trying to accomplish. because of what you did, I was able to save you, to save our lineage and many other people. God is weaving. God is knitting. Again, we're not victims, and we're not masters. We are being utilized to fulfill his plans in accordance to his will. Amen.